Thank you so much, and welcome everyone to the webinar, 2017 ICD 10 CM Updates and Challenges for Orthopedics. There are so many changes, and Andy, am I allowed to ask your help? Because now I'm not, there we go. I just wanted to walk you through. I apologize for that brief delay. The course objectives, what we're here to learn today is recognizing new, revised, and deleted ICD-10 CM codes that are taking effect, as everyone should be well aware, October 1st, 2016. Today we're focusing specifically on orthopedic-only practices and how your practice can avoid setbacks to reimbursement. We also want to show you all the amazing tools that supercoder.com, the Coding Institute, has to offer in order to accurately select your code sets that are necessary for your compliance effectiveness reviews, and ensure that your providers are maximizing their reimbursement and submitting clean claims the first time they're sent out. One of the biggest things that we should be aware of is the fact that there is an addenda. So we're all well aware that in June the addenda was completed for the ICD-10 CM and PCS updates, although today's webinar will just be focusing on CM itself for our diagnosis codes. But the final changes that will take effect this October, everything is available and published. The addenda, because there are so many changes that one may not be aware of, and you want to make sure that you're updated on the latest and greatest to ensure that your practice has all the information they need to ensure this, ensure maximum reimbursement on their claims. I apologize if you can see my mouse. I think we may have a little bit of a lag. There we go. So within this webinar, we want to go through and tell you everything the ICD-10 CM changes and clarifications. There's a lot of guidance on our 7th character applications in Chapter 19. There's after codes that apply to our ID codes, which are more appropriate instead of injury codes, which all pertain to orthopedics. We all know there are thousands and thousands of changes overall that have gone into effect. But today's focus is going to be how this actually affects our orthopedic practices, our ortho providers, and how we can ensure that we're sending out a clean claim that first time. One of the biggest things is there's heightened security to several areas within orthopedics. We want to make sure that you're ensuring that the supporting medical necessity for your hip and knee replacements, your arthroscopic femoral impingement repairs and knee arthroscopies are documented accordingly so that you can ensure your providers are well aware of the fact that if it's not documented correctly, we're not going to meet medical necessity, and therefore CMS, if they don't see that highest level of scrutiny in the specificity, we no longer have that leeway. So we've got to make sure our providers are educated ahead of time, and then we can submit that clean claim every time. We're also going to focus today on coding for fractures of pelvic rings, hips, femurs. There's so many new changes to the specialty. We've got nerve compression and repair, open and arthroscopic surgery, step-by-step coding of intra-articular and shot fractures of the radius and ulna, tendon and muscle repairs in the forearm and wrist. All of the documentation needs to be there by the provider in order to meet that medical necessity and submit that claim correctly. Otherwise, we're gonna see a whole bunch of things coming back from CMS to the providers, and they're not going to be happy. So that's why we want to help you prepare ahead of time to ensure that there's no issues with that. One of the biggest changes, again, we're all familiar with this just from the initial switch into ICD-10, CM, PCS, but it's our 7th characters. We want to make sure that we are applying a 7th character code to the codes that are pertinent and apply, and you'll notice that there's cheat sheets. If you go into your coding book, you can see exactly where you need to apply the 7th character. And this is just basically a brief overview of what those 7 characters mean. And And I'm sure by now we're all familiar with our A being our initial encounter for fracture, D being subsequent encounter for fracture with routine healing. We've got our G for with delayed. We've got our non-union and malunions being our K and P, and then we've got our S for sequela. Another big change is our atypical fractures, and according to a doctor from the American Society for Bone and Mineral Research, the term atypical femoral fracture is widely accepted in the academic community. I'm not sure how many of you out there are working with the academic community, whether or not you've got residents, interns, all of that sort of thing. But if your orthopedist is indeed utilizing the term Fosamax fracture, then you are allowed to now refer to that as an atypical fracture. And that's the rationale that we're going to be discussing within this. This kind of fracture can happen in some without exposure to biphosphonates. And what that is that clinicians and researchers need to be able to track all of these atypical femoral fractures. And by calling them Fosamax fractures, then a population of the patients may actually be missed. And the population that's missed are those who are in absence of taking the drugs. So you can't necessarily assume that they are medication related, and that's where all of these new codes come into play. We want to make sure that we're reviewing all the clinical documentation in order to verify that codes can be assigned without use of the unspecified codes. And I apologize, I didn't actually click forward on that slide. That was my fault. But we want to make sure that we're reviewing all this clinical documentation so that we can ensure our providers are making sure that their clinical documentation is becoming improved. They're providing the feedback to ensure that the guidance on capturing these specific data requirements is there. I know a lot of the practices have, we all know about PCMH, PQRS, meaningful use, all of the government incentives and quality initiatives that are out there. We want to do everything in our power to ensure that these providers get their maximum reimbursement. And there's so many ways that preparing ahead of time, utilizing the amazing tools within supercoder.com and everything can ensure that that is reached. So again, one of the biggest things is knowing that defining a Fosamax fracture, making sure that the patient is actually taking that particular drug or not taking that particular drug, because that will have a definitive answer in between. We also want to make sure that additional codes have not been added that were once listed as unspecified prior to the code freeze, but come October 1st, 2016, they will be changed. And some of the ways we can do this is ensuring that we're always on our providers, educating, implementing, and changing to ensure that maximum reimbursement is achieved by them. These are a list of the atypical fracture codes, and the codes that everyone will have to start implementing become October 1st, 2016.